Hi, welcome to the third episode of The Science Behind Baking. Today we're going to be making sponge cakes and seeing the effect of cold versus room temperature egg whites. I always wondered if the temperature of eggs affected a sponge cake's ability to rise. To examine this matter, we will first look over scientific concepts and then I'll do my own little baking experiment. According to Bon Appetit, egg proteins will be broken due to whisking and will be able to trap air regardless. However, East Meets Kitchen states that eggs, when warmer, have looser proteins, making it easier for them to trap air. This makes sense because in warmer temperatures, molecules move faster and may disrupt some intermolecular bonds, allowing for more flexibility of movement of the proteins. Egg whites, contrary to egg yolks, hold the most air, which makes them the most crucial for making sponge cakes. When we look at the structure of an egg white, we see that it's mainly water. This is important because there are hydrophilic and hydrophobic interactions. Hydrophilic means the tendency to love water, whereas hydrophobic means the tendency to repel water. In the diagram shown, we see that the hydrophobic parts of the protein are attached to the air bubble where there isn't any water. But the hydrophilic parts of the protein, which like water, are pointed towards the outside, and those connect to other egg white molecules or more water. To understand how eggs whip up, it's important to know how proteins are formed. Egg whites are at a tertiary structure, which is 3D and formed by R-group interactions. R-groups, or side chains, are special properties on a protein. For example, there's hydrogen bonding, which is like hydrophilic interactions, and nonpolar interactions, which is hydrophobic. So when egg whites are beaten, they unravel back into their primary structure, which is a string of amino acids. The hydrogen bonding, or the weak intermolecular forces between the R groups, are disrupted by the physical force of the whisk. Then they begin to come back together, and the secondary structure forms through hydrogen bonding again. On the right, we see an alpha helix and a B-pleated sheet. This is the semi-structure before air bubbles are introduced. Finally, the tertiary structure is introduced again, and nonpolar R groups are able to attract to the air bubbles through hydrophobic interactions. Finally, we have an expanded structure. And it looks like this, which is what I previously showed. So I'm leaning towards Bon Appetit's conclusion that intermolecular bonds are going to be broken anyways after beating. Although it's true that in warm temperatures proteins will be looser, I really don't think it will have that much of an impact. But we can discover this through our little baking experiment. My aunt got me this apron for Christmas. She says Caitlin's Bake Shop, which is pretty cute. Before we get started on the cake, I'm just gonna prep our two 6-inch pans. And to do that, we need some parchment paper, which I've haphazardly tore out. Cut like kind of the radius. Sorry, I'm not the greatest at explaining. But here is a piece of parchment that is similar to the size, a little bigger than the size of my pan. And I'm just gonna keep folding it until I can't fold it any longer. The more folds you have, the more of a circular shape you're gonna get. So I think here is good enough. Now I'm going to approximate the center point of the pan here. So I think it's around here. And then I'm going to cut right at this point. So now when we open it up, a cute little circle parchment. So the two pans have parchment paper at the bottom now. This one I actually did so beautifully, like I don't think I've ever done it that pretty. But anyways, we're not gonna oil the outsides because I want the sponge cake as it rises to cling on to the side of the pan. That's actually called adhesion forces, intermolecular forces, where the cake batter will like attach and then it'll help it rise. So it's similar to like in plants, but yeah. So in this experiment, we are determining the effect of cold versus room temperature eggs. And to make sure there's no other confounding variable that can skew how much the cake can rise, I want to make sure all the other ingredients are weighed exactly the same. And that means that we have to use a kitchen scale, and I will be using grams, just because volume isn't as accurate, and for the purpose of science, I want to make sure we can be as accurate as possible. But if you want to make this recipe at home, you can completely use volume. Like I use volume for this. But yeah, let's get started. So obviously, eggs won't be weighed exactly the same, so I'll try my best to make sure that they are pretty much exactly the same. I have a clean bowl here. You have to make sure there's no grease residue or else the egg whites won't whip up. So I'm just going to give the egg a crack and separate them. So for this first cake, we have 73 grams of egg whites and 29 grams of egg yolks. You may have seen that I just dumped it into the bowl earlier, but I just reweighed them. Now I'm going to crack the next two eggs into these little glass ramekins because it's easier to crack eggs when they're cold. Now, if the values don't exactly match up, I'm going to get rid of some egg white or some egg yolk. So if you want the safe way of separating eggs, you can do it this method as well. So I'm just going to crack it, and then I will scoop it with my fingers because they are very not sharp, unlike the egg yolk, or unlike the eggshell. And this way we will have almost a guaranteed chance that no egg yolk will contaminate the egg white. Somehow the the 4 eggs I chose are all like very similar in size because I got 73 grams of egg whites for each cake and 29 grams of egg yolks for each cake. So we are going to whip these first. These are cold, and while we do that, these are still cold, but we'll let them wait so that they can come to room temperature. So we're gonna start with our egg yolks. We have our 2 egg yolks, and we are going to give them a little whisk. It's good enough for now. And then we are going to add 25 grams of sugar. And then, honestly, it's not that crucial to whip up the egg yolks currently because the egg whites will be doing the lifting, but a lot of recipes will focus on whipping both of them. But I'm just gonna give this a good mix. Okay, 23 grams of milk and 20 grams of oil. I'm using canola oil. You can use vegetable oil. Any flavorless oil would be good here. Now we're gonna sift in 30 grams of cake flour. Cake flour has less protein than all-purpose flour, which will let it have a softer crumb and develop less gluten, which is good for cakes because if you have a lot of gluten, it'll be really chewy. I'm sure it'll work okay with all-purpose flour as well. I'm adding in some lemon zest for some flavor, but this is completely optional. You could substitute this with vanilla extract, and I will weigh it just in case it has an effect, but I really doubt lemon zest will have an effect. Honestly, it'll probably be like 1 gram, so very insignificant. So as you can see, It is still very light, but the bubbles are getting smaller, and I think this is the perfect time to start gradually adding in the sugar. Okay, here we have, I think they're stiff peaks. Gently incorporate the egg whites into the egg yolks mixture. And to do this, I'm gonna first use my whisk and take a little dollop of these egg whites just to gradually incorporate that. The most important part about folding is that we don't knock the air out. So you can already tell the mixture is lighter just from the egg whites. Now we're gonna switch to a spatula. So I wanna make sure I'm really gentle and I don't knock out the air. It's especially important because in this recipe, I don't know if you could tell, but there's no baking powder or baking soda. So we're counting on the eggs to leaven this mixture. So my mom always taught me to scrape every bowl as clean as possible when I bake, so that's one of my fundamentals too. I hate watching shows where people never scrape their bowls clean. Probably because they're on a time rush, but I can't stand it. Pretty clean. We know when we're done when all the ingredients have just mixed in. Oh, this batter smells amazing. I love lemons. This batter is super light and airy, so you can just kind of jiggle it around. Maybe use your spatula a little bit. But the number one most important thing is to not deflate the batter. As you can tell, it's a lot more loose than if you were to follow like a butter cake recipe. So now we're gonna put this in the oven immediately so that the air bubbles don't collapse. Okay, so I guess I baked the other cake too fast because these egg whites aren't quite room temperature yet. So I placed them into a warm water bath and we'll see how it goes. Hi guys, I just finished training and I flipped the two cakes out. This is them right side up, and as you can see, this is the first one with cold eggs and this is the second one with room temperature eggs, and they're the same height. However, there's been a mistake on my part because this cake pan was too small to support the height of the cake, so it actually rose above the pan and then it didn't have enough structure to stay up. And another mistake was I was running late to training, so I couldn't take the cakes out of the oven and hang them upside down, which would allow the sponge to not compress back in the pan. So I'm gonna try another trial with a larger cake tin as well as correctly letting it cool down. So I did the same thing, but I used larger pans, and here we have the two cakes. So this one is the one made with cold eggs, and this one is the one made with room temperature eggs. And you can see I cooked them long enough because they have this really beautiful sheen on top. Yeah, but they're definitely flat because I used a very large pan. So when we look at the height, it seems as if the one with room temperature is actually taller, but that's also the edge. So I think the centers are around the same. So I'm gonna measure the two. The thing is, you can see that it goes up. So I think the exact centers of both of them are around like 2¼ centimeters. And then here, the center I would approximate to also be around 2¼ centimeters. But if we look at the edge, which this rose to, I think it's more like 3 centimeters as opposed to also like 2½ centimeters. So my conclusion is that they yield really similar results. And in my opinion, I would just use the cold egg method, just because I think it's unnecessary to wait more time just to get like this little edge of a rise. One possible reason that the cakes were both somewhat equal was that I had to use these non-stick pans. You can see that it's a lot like smoother, and that means that the cake doesn't have enough friction to go up the sides and possibly grow taller. But I didn't have any non-stick pans to use, so unfortunately I wouldn't know if it would have made a larger difference or a smaller difference. Another possible source of error was that this cold egg cake was made in advance or made earlier than the room temperature egg cake, so it kind of sat. So I'm not sure if the air bubbles decreased a little bit, but it wasn't for too long, and the batters looked relatively similar. So maybe that's why, maybe the cold one could have risen a little higher on the edges. But I think overall, they definitely look pretty similar.